Hi, welcome to this lecture on constraint layout. This is the particular setup of our Android Studio. In order to create a new constraint layout, we simply go to the res folder, we click on layout folder, right click, and we go to new layout resource file. From here, we can give any name we like. Okay, and the root element we can see here is the constraint layout. Simply click on OK. After this, we are provided with an empty XML file or the empty design. So before going any further into constraint layout, let's first understand what does the word constraint means. In plain English, constraint means limit. So in constraint layout, whatever we keep or whatever the views we use in constraint layout should be provided with the limits or the borders. The borders are specified in 4 directions, like this, represented by the 4 circles. So in order for these views to work in constraint layout, there should be at least 2 borders or 2 constraints. Okay, so these things, they can be set by simply clicking on it and then dragging, right? So this is how the constraint works. Second thing is, we can simply change the sizes of these elements or the views using the 4 squares that are located on the 4 sides. Lastly, constraint need not only be the parents. Constraints can be other siblings too. Let's say this is a button and we drag another button. So the top constraint of it can be another element like this. It need not necessarily be the parent. And last but not the least, constraints or the 4 circles. Once they are done, they're filled circles. Okay, so these are the filled ones. Filled one means we have already specified the constraints. We can simply delete by going here and click on cross mark. Okay, for the time being, simply click on the constraint. Another important part of constraint layout is these constraints, the 4 sides. The horizontal ones can only be constrained to the horizontal sides. The vertical ones can only be constrained to the vertical sides. Let's say this horizontal thing cannot be constrained to the vertical side or here. It can only be constrained to this or this or this or this, but not on the top or the bottom. Similarly, the top and the bottom constraint cannot be constrained to the left or the right. Let us suppose we've kept a view inside the constraint layout, but we have not specified the constraints. So in order to automatically do that, simply select. Okay, so we can see that because of this feature, the 2 constraints, they are automatically added. But let's say we delete this also. Now there are no constraints. Now for us to automatically give the constraint, we simply go to this little icon called Info Constraint. We click on it, then the constraints, they are automatically added. We can see the top and the right constraints are added to our views. So this is how the particular constraint layout setup. Let us understand about match constraint. Match constraint means, let's say we specify 2 constraints for this button. Now this button cannot go further or away, surpassing its constraints. Let's say for its width we say match constraint, then it cannot go further than this. But for match parent, it was like it can cover the whole thing. Guidelines. Guidelines are the individual or invisible lines we can see during the design view, but we cannot see them in the actual app. They are for specifying the constraints or specifying the borders. Let's say this button doesn't have anything in this side or this side, then what we can simply do is we can simply add a guideline. Go to right click, helper, add a vertical guideline. Then we can simply add it here, and then we can specify the constraint based on this guideline. Okay, first use. The second use is, let's say this guideline is here and we have constrained all of our views in one line. Then another day a requirement comes in that we need more spacing between these things. For that, what we have to do is we simply had to drag it like this, each and every buttons. Instead of doing that, what we can do is we can simply set the guideline as the constraint for everything. Let's say we set the constraints to our buttons. Okay, all right, so let's say this button was here. Okay, now in order for this button to move, simply we can move the guideline, as simple as that. So two things. First thing is, if there are no views and we need to constrain a certain view, then we need guideline, first thing. The second thing is, if we have to move a group of views based on certain guideline or based on certain space, then we need the guidelines. Now, the barriers. The barrier is simply like a guideline, but the only difference is the barrier moves according to the length of the content. Okay, in order to create a barrier, we select the views or elements we want to create barrier from. So we select two text views here. Then we can simply right click, go to helpers, and then add a vertical or a horizontal barrier. In our case, we create a vertical barrier. Now we can see in the component tree a barrier has been added. So we simply select the elements we want to keep in the barrier and then drag them here. So a barrier is created. Right now the barrier is in the left direction, left side. We put them at the end or this side. Now we can see a barrier here. Now when we put this button and use this barrier as the constraint, then whenever the text, any text, let's say this text, we increase the size of this text, then the barrier also moves. Here you can see. And when the size is small, let's say the size is simply J, okay, the barrier will take the longest side, or it won't go further than this one because it will take the lengthiest part. So it will not move along with this. Okay, so this is all about barrier. Now we talk about biasing. Suppose we give the left constraint and the right constraint, and it appears in between, or the element appears in between. Now we want to move it towards the left side, then this thing is called bias. So we are biasing it to move to the left direction, or we can move to the right direction. Similarly, if we give the vertical constraints, we can move it vertically. So this is the use of biasing. Now, using whatever we have learned about constraint layout so far, we're going to create a project. We're going to create an app like this. At first, we've got an image in the background, so we need an image view. Click on it. We select the source of the image. Our case is the Joker BZ. Click on OK. right? So simply minimize the height. We set constraints on all these sides. Okay, so this was the first requirement. The second requirement is we set the width and the height to match constraint. Okay, and after setting one of this width or height to 0, we are provided with this rectangular thing. So click on this, and then we need ratio of 16:9 for our cover picture. 16:9 means if the width is 16 times longer, then the height should be at least 9 times longer. So we hit enter, right? And then simply drag it to the top. Okay, now first thing done. Second thing is we need this image to be constrained or aligned in between this, or the half of this image should be aligned to the bottom of this image. For that, we need image view, then obviously need an image. Set the height for the time being to 150 dp, let's say. Okay, now for this to come in between this side and this side, what we simply do is first set the constraint of the bottom side to the bottom, then we set the constraint of the top side. Okay, and it's not, let's say, yeah, now it came in between. Now we can set this width to 0 dp. Okay, after doing that, we are given access to this rectangular thing. Now what we simply do is 2 is to 3. So 2 is the width, 3 is the height. All right, so our image now looks like this. We can simply drag it here. Okay, so this is the picture of Joker. Now, second thing is we need this text. All right, we can simply click on the text view, drag the text view, and one more thing to note down is this banner thing. So when we write anything here, let's say Joker, this is only for testing purpose, or the text having this symbol or a spanner symbol is simply for testing purpose. Okay, so this will not be in fact displayed. Okay, I'll show you this. Yeah, when I click on this text, sorry. Okay, so when I click here, I mean this text, the text inside this thing, the spanner thing, it will not be actually displayed on the original app. It is just for testing purpose. But when you add text inside the actual text, then this is actually added in the original app. So it's up to you. Now, for now, I can add anything, same thing here as well. Suzuka. Then I can give, or I can change its font or text appearance from here. Let's say display 1. All right, it's a bit bigger. I can change its text size from 34 to, let's say, 30. Okay, I can make it bold. I can change the text color from black to, let's say, red. So depends what I want to do with this. All right, so after this we need an image. So for getting an image, we need image view. So we simply drag on the image. Okay, now we need this bookmark image. We simply click on OK. All right, so for anything to be kept in Android Studio in the constraint view, we need the constraints. Since we can see 3 constraints are already set. 1, 2, 3, they're already set. So we need not do anything. Simply keep it there. Now another requirement is that next text view. Okay, So next text view. Now this text view. Okay, so this text view, the texts in this text view should not go further than this image. Okay, for that we keep a constraint here, and let's say here. All right, so we simply keep it like this. Now okay, after keeping the constraints, what we simply do is we specify the width as not the wrap content but the math constraint. Now however lengthier is the text, let's say this is my text, I simply copy this, I simply paste it. However lengthier it is, it will not pass this image. All right, so this is the essence behind this thing. Let's simply delete this. Okay, all right, now simply keep homogeneate it. This is my text view. All right, click on enter. Now this thing is done. So what we have used so far, we have used constraints so far, right? And then we have used match constraints. Okay, now we are going to use a guideline. Now let's say these two are the buttons. Okay, so simply click here and then drag a button here. Now whenever I need to set this button with reference to anything, but I don't want to take this views as the reference, what I can simply do is I simply can right click helpers and then add horizontal guideline. Now you can see the guideline came here. You can simply drag the guideline. Now what I can do is I can simply set the top constraint as this guidelines. Okay, so these buttons, they will not move further away from the guideline, but when you drag the guideline down, you can see that the guideline will move the image. So whenever I move the guidelines, the buttons, they move as well. Okay, you can see it here. All right, yeah. Okay, there we go. Now we need these 4 buttons. Okay, for this thing we simply drag the image view. Those are actually the image views. Now you can select any background. Let's say the Google Play background 1. Okay, select another one, 2. Okay, click on that, and then 3. The buttons are actually bigger. And 3 button. Okay, so in fact 4 buttons. So let's change the height of the button to let's say 50 dp. Okay, 50 dp. It's too small, I guess. Let's change it to 100 dp. Okay, sounds good. Width as well, 100 dp. Okay, so I'm changing this to 100 and 100, or let's say 75, I guess. 75 dp, and this as well to 75 dp. Okay, similarly this thing 75 dp and 70. 75 dp. Okay, now this thing dp and 75 dp. Okay, so we need one more. We need one more, and its size would as well be 75 dp and 75 dp. Okay, now using all these 4 images, we can create a chain. Okay, so for us to create a chain, we simply, now let's create a guideline again, because we want to align this for on a guideline, so that if any requirement comes in, let's say this thing and this button should be a little bit further away or anything like that, then we can simply change the guidelines dp. Okay, so what we can simply do is we can simply click on here, helpers, add horizontal guidelines. So this is the guideline. We simply, sorry, this was the guideline. We simply drag this guideline. Yeah, this is the new guideline. Drag this guideline, and then we constrain the top of this icon to this guideline. Okay, yes. Now, all right. Okay, simply select them, drag them to the top, select them, and then drag them to the top. All right, so now whenever we move this guideline, this should also move. So the images inside this part is just a fancier part. We can do them later on. Now we're going to make chains. So in order to make the chains, first we have to select the elements from which we want to make the chains. So in our case, these are the 4 images we want to make the chains. So we select all 4 of these. We go to chain, then create a horizontal chain. Okay, now we can see the space between all of these are equally apart. Now, okay, sounds cool. If we'd like to give the margins, we can give as well. Let's say I want to move this margin, I want to select this image and give this margin as 8. We can give it. Everything else moves as well. We'll keep 16. Okay. Now, there we go. Now, we'll have to keep the text. So, for the text to come in between these borders, what we simply do is we select the text view, drag the text view. Let's give it a name. Let's say family. Okay. Then we give them constraint. So left constraint to the left of this image and right constraint to the right of this image. Now it's coming in between. Similarly, we give all the text as well. So I think this should be all, and hope you have understood about constraint layout. Have a good day and happy learning. Thank you.